Cool. So welcome to the acoustics module. As you might be aware, I won't be available in person throughout this semester, except for a few occasions in November. So we will meet once again in November. But most of the things will be online. So what you will receive is a weekly lecture on one of the topics, and I believe there will be 9 or 10. Okay, so I'm actually delivering these live in Bristol, so you're gonna share virtually your studies with British students. I guess it's legal, whatever. But I will be uploading it. I do this on Friday, so probably Friday evening I will upload the lecture. Now these are typically 1.5 hours. I'm gonna talk about theory mostly, discuss a lot of interesting details, although technically just scratch the surface. Okay, so no equations. I'm just gonna show maybe a few equations. You want equations? You want to do math? No. Semmiképpen. Your first Hungarian word? Semmiképpen. It's a good word. No way.
There are better words to start with.
Yeah?
I don't know.
Oh, come on. Give us a go. Give us a joke. Now,
I mean,
spotlights are on you.
Do I want to tell Bogdan how to say nyomod basszeg, or something like that, you know, like...
Nyomod. Nyomod.
Yeah, like let's go.
Aha. Nyomjuk.
Yeah.
Nyomás.
But like...
Nyomás, actually, in Vojvodina they say nyomás also. There's quite a few words that they use in North Serbia. You sound like Hungarian a bit, like Vajdasági, but you're not. Anyway. You have to say nisam ja Magyarica. Because I don't know which language I'm talking now. Anyway, those were the jokes. Yeah. I beszél szerbül. I beszél bosnyákul, I beszél horvátul, kroésanül. Persze. De azért hasonló, meg hollandul is elég jó, meg most már spanyolul is. Na, akkor tehát lesz hetente 1,5 óra videóanyag, jó? És ezt úgy fogom vizsgáztatni, tehát a vizsga, gondolom mindenki, oh sorry, I have to talk in English, right? So the exam, don't confuse me with the exam, what we will have is 2 parts of the exam. One will be the theoretical part, which is your notes from the lectures. Okay, so what I will do in the video lectures is that throughout I will ask 3, maybe 4 questions, and I will explicitly say these are your portfolio questions, okay? But they will typically be summarize what you've just heard. They won't really ask you to go further into studying, but it will be my way of kind of knowing that you've seen the video and that you pay some attention, because you will answer the questions that are pertinent to the content at that stage. Okay, so that will be, I think, 9 lectures. Let's go with 9. But in any case, for each lecture, about 3 questions. So for each lecture in your exam, I will ask for 1 A4 sheet. Okay, so however much you want to put, you can put a thing. In a way, you know, you will get an excellent grade if it is obvious that you've made it for your own learning and memory, rather than for the sake of, you know, giving something for the exam. Okay, so it will be your notes. So that will be half of your mark. Okay, and the other half will be measurement. Okay, so same thing, every week I will have a measuring task, which I will also have a video of. The introduction of it will be much shorter. I will be using fuzz measure. So for those of you who have Macintosh computers, that could work easily. You can probably even get it cracked. Otherwise, there are PC options such as Room EQ Wizard, which is a good one. However, I'm not going to directly show you the steps in that other software. Okay, so every week we will have a measurement. Now, what you can do if you guys are really, if you're interested in building a community, or if it's already built, you can come together and do those. Okay, so what I will ask is 3 out of those measurement tasks worked out on paper for the exam. Okay, so there will be 9 you can choose. You can choose the simpler ones if you want to get over with things quickly. You can take the later ones, which are typically a bit more complex. What you will need for the measurements is 1 speaker, 1 sound card, 1 microphone. I'm not sure if you can get a hold of a measurement microphone, but anyway, we will be looking at ways of assessing the suitability of microphones for different measuring tasks. Okay, so that's essentially the exam. 1 measurement and 1 portfolio of things. Okay? Any questions about this? I'm not sure about the deadline. I think it's mid-January to submit everything. Okay, Balázs will make this clear at some point later in the moment. Actually, I hate to be very authoritative. So if you have a better idea for the exams, or what I can also think of, if someone says, listen, I'm really bored of your theory, I don't get it anyway, I don't want to get it, I want to do the measurements, I think we can do something like swap a measurement for a note, class note, or something like this. Also, I'm happy to receive the class notes in Hungarian and Serbian. Yay. But that is actually slightly more challenging because you will have to translate. Right? The lectures are in English, so it will probably, if you're really just, repeating my words in a written form, it's probably easier to do it in English. If you are interested to study something, it's probably if you translate it to your native language. I'm not accepting it in Russian so far, but maybe in the future. Okay, one thing to know is the only way to learn something is to want to learn it, right? So actually my task is, obviously I will, send you all the stuff and recommend you all the good books in a minute. But actually my real purpose is to get you motivated, to give you a sense of urgency, actually, and provoke you, hopefully as well. Okay, one of the things that maybe I'll spend now. You're still kind of awake. You don't seem to be distracted. I can try to just mention a few really interesting things already. Okay, the kind of things you can expect just to get you going before I look through a few books and send it to you. But to me, actually, the most exciting thing to understand is the paradigm problem. Okay, so typically what we have in human cognition is that we are quite unaware of our monkeyness, and we have a pretension to understand the universe. Okay, so what we are actually doing is we are creating models. We are reflecting reality in some way, increasingly more detailed way. But to think that we will, solve the puzzle, or that there is a puzzle to solve, is actually a ranking motivation, which is a mammalian thing. Monkeys do this all the time. In fact, monkeys are a bit better than us. They typically need about 3 hours per day to produce sufficient nutrition and safety. And they kind of telling us we need to work 8 hours a day. So we're being held for stupid monkeys, especially because we are supposedly more clever and better organized. And if we do this math, evolutionarily, we should probably be at the level of 3 minutes of work per day, just to secure the nutrition and the energy and the safety. If we were actually clever monkeys. But hopefully we will become more clever. Nothing for now, unfortunately. So whenever you notice that someone is, explaining things very convincingly, like I am, you have to understand he's a monkey who is ranking himself right now. Okay, now, as far as the science goes, which is great, it actually does explain this phenomenon the way I just did. But actually the science itself, our empirical methods, are very limited. In fact, we are very well aware of the limitations, and the strict causality, as we know it, something happens and therefore there is a result, something else happens, is actually a very narrow-minded, narrow-viewed way of approaching things, especially because of the contrary evidence that we have. Okay, so this is currently it's a scientific chapter, but it might grow, called complex systems. And if you're interested and you remind me, I can send you a behavioral biology lecture from one of the American universities where a guy gives you 3-4 examples in very basic biological mechanisms where causation collapses. You just cannot use causation as a model to predict anything. Okay? Now the funny thing is, do we know where else do we know causation to fail? What were the most recently sacked Hungarian institute directors on the August of 20th?
Oh yeah.
Meteorology. Okay, so it's another domain where the complexity of the system is obvious, and what we have is people typically call it unpredictable, but I refrain from simplifying it to that degree. I like to say that there is no shortcut to prediction, because we can create a complex, typically chaotic system with a very simple program as well, which is not, you don't have a shortcut to predict it, so I cannot say what will happen after 1,000 steps without going through the 1,000 steps. So we actually have complex systems, which are, by the way, deterministic models. There's no random in there. Everything is totally determined through recursive equations, differential equations. And we know, as a matter of fact, that we cannot jump to a state far in the future. Only thing we can do is we can run the model and see where it goes. Okay, so our weather patterns are similar in that. And we see it because typically if we see the satellite picture now, we know whether it's going to rain within an hour. But tomorrow is a mystery, and it remains to be so. Okay, so there's always room for failure. Now, the very interesting thing, so these are the domains where, people have defeated causal thinking and causal models. The funny thing is that in acoustics we have a similar situation. Okay, so one of these books, it's been a while, has a really nice introduction chapter, which essentially talks about this, how after, coming from physics, people who are acousticians are typically amazing with maths and physics. Being able to do all the complex math there, being totally convinced that, the world follows the math. By the way, there is a great book by Lakoff called Where Mathematics Comes From. If someone is interested, how a monkey brain produces mathematics. That's an amazing book, because that's what happens. A monkey brain produces mathematics. It's not, a worm doesn't produce it, the shining sun doesn't produce it, the wind doesn't produce it, a monkey brain does it, okay? A mammalian brain. I like to call us monkeys. I don't know if you find this attractive at all. Lakoff. Lakoff, Where Mathematics Comes From. Lakoff. Okay, so acoustics is a similar situation. So we have a lot of good models, increasingly good software models that will run a simulation of a space, but actually, typically for the artistic purposes that we are ultimately looking at, the conclusion is that you don't know until you get into the space. Okay, there's many times you will have very pleasant surprises, and many times you will have very unpleasant surprises. So it is a lot like... Hát, hogyha elmondasz még 3 mondatot, akkor még jobb lesz. Ilyenkor viccet kell mondani nálam, hogyha késő.
Ja, jó, Stockhausen, az nagyon nehéz.
Ráadásul Stockhausen viccet. Na jó, ilyen nehéz. Váratlanul nem érzem. If you're late, by the way, on the class, you have to say a joke. Just to cheer up the crew. Halljuk. Ha valami rövidet.
Nem tudok, ilyen kopvicceket hallottam, ilyen kop-kopvicceket, de azok sem.
Na, kop-kop vicc, az tök el, most kopogtál be.
Nagyon nehéz le a magyar sugi.
Kop-kop, ki az? Na? Gyere.
Ami szokott lenni, hogy kusba maradok, és akkor visszakérdezem még egyszer, és akkor mondom, hogy süket vagyok, vagy valami ilyen nagyon rossz, nem tudom.
Ó, de ezt... De ezt el kell játszani, nem szabad úgy viccet mondani. So just to translate, the joke was knock knock, no answer. Knock knock, sorry I'm deaf. There you go.
I mean, yeah.
So if you're late, you know you're being late, you know, before you enter the door, you know you have some time to prepare the joke.
Rendben.
Okay, rendben. The only thing is we won't have many classes in person, but never mind. So I was saying that in acoustics, you will have the experts who have 20, 30 years experience of coding acoustical models, doing the math, doing the physics. They grow old and they say, you know what, it will always be a mystery. You know, in terms of how does an actual room sound like. So why is this? Well, I kind of mentioned it last time with shall I repeat this bit? Some of you haven't been there. For psychoacoustics. So the thing is that we imagine sound in two different ways. And I will talk about this in more detail in one of the lectures. One is arrows. Okay, arrows travel through space. We conceive sound as if they were arrows or rays. The other one is we conceive them as wave fronts, which you can visualize as concentric circles in a pond. I throw in a pebble into a pond, you get these concentric circles. Okay. Question, what is sound? Is it a wavefront or is it a ray?
Both. Depends on the frequency.
Any other ideas?
It's actually the pond thing, but in certain situations it turns into an arrow.
Really? That's interesting. You're very well trained.
Yeah.
To consider humans more clever than the environment. Any other ideas?
Well, the arrow one is how we perceive sound, but the waveform one is how it happens actually.
Well, how we perceive sound is what we're discussing in psychoacoustics. It's a really complex pattern of electronic excitation in the brain. So actually perception of sound is an electronic phenomenon. Bioelectronic phenomenon, neurological phenomenon, that's perception. The question was actually, what is it really without our perception? And the answer is, we can't know. We can say a word, which is a monkey brain activity, right? So what we do is we are building models to explain something, to predict something which we can experimentally verify. Okay, so actually what you said is really good because those are that's the way we use the models, right?
Yeah.
So if it's a high frequency sound, right? Typically the sound radiation is also more directional. Okay, therefore very often for high frequency sound we will use the model of an arrow or a ray. For low frequency sounds, typically in our environment, low frequency emitters don't have such a strong directivity, which means they're omnidirectional, so it spreads in all directions. Therefore, for low frequencies, we are often better off using the model of wavefronts. Okay? So that's just to kind of get you warmed up, because it really helps. Because once you start thinking like this, it's more of a game, right? Because if we're completely convinced that we are solving the mystery of the universe rather than playing monkey games, we get a bit uptight, you know, like I am often when I talk about these things. There's a sense of being very serious and things being crucially correct or incorrect. Okay, so, and obviously I suffer from this. That's why I'm here as well. This is my therapy. You guys have to help me release this and make it more playful as well. Okay? Obviously, it's part of my job to make things exact and highlight lack of precision. And and problems with ambiguity. Okay, so that's the thing. Now, what is the main thing that the paradigm embraces is a point source. Okay, so in acoustics, and I said a bit about this in psychoacoustics, in order to set up an equation, which is already far too complex for all of us, we have to tremendously simplify the behavior of a sound source. And we simplify it by saying it's a point. What is a point?
An infinitely small coordinates, I guess.
Yeah? I was hoping someone will say it's monkey business.
Yeah.
Yeah? Because
Okay.
actually, everything that everything that you don't bump your head against, pretty much, is the product of the monkey brain. So the first question, can I bump my head against the point? Well, I can do if you make it out of metal and suspend it in mid-air, right? Magnetically or somehow. But that's not the point. That's a magnetic ball suspended in the air.
It's not gonna be a point because
And as well, it doesn't really correspond to our mathematical idea of the point, which is this infinitesimal thing which serves us in order to set up simple equations that to a good degree predict stuff. Okay? So there's no issue with this, but it's not the ultimate authority. In fact, what we have is that our inspiration to seek the ultimate truth is a monotheistic inspiration. Okay, so the tables really turned in the history of evolving mind when we slid from polytheism into monotheism, right? Because before that, you can imagine, oh, today I'm, praising the god of fertility, and tomorrow I'm praising the god of passing or whatever. So in a monotheistic mind, monkey mind, you're actually much more free to be this or that. Excuse me?
today I'm conceiving, tomorrow I'm having an abortion.
Yeah, exactly. So what you have then is that that with this, developments of monotheistic mind, we have this beautiful, by the way, and very romantic idea of the ultimate truth, of the ultimate authority. In fact, that's how we set up our own minds in many ways. We always try to refer to the immutable self. And we just had an excellent example how this self can change from one day to the other. Okay, so it's, and obviously the whole society kind of keeps a track of, the people keep track of each other in that way, kind of verify whether you're the same person. But actually it's a really troublesome thing to do. So in a sense, the way this relates to acoustics, is that we don't have the ultimate truth, we don't have the ultimate answer. It's not in the equations, it's not in everything, it's not in perception, it's the game we play. And one of the amazing tools we have to play this game well is acoustics. Okay, I would like to draw a parallel with playing instruments. I guess some of you play instruments, maybe some of you make instruments. In the way that, you see, if you play systemically, we had this joke last week about systemic music, conceptual music, late at night in the in the bar. It caused a lovely, you don't even remember, right? At one point I think I said conceptual music is bullshit. because actually what you have, it was a lovely moment. Because you see, what happens is that we can use systemic thinking, we can use concepts to grow the vocabulary. Okay, it's actually the best way of growing your vocabulary. So you look at all the possible options, you go through all the possible options, you dissect things, you are, operating in a reductive mindset, you chop things up. You say, okay, this is how I play. Well, maybe my pitch is wrong. Maybe my dynamics is like this. So you actually don't look at the phenomenon as a whole. You look at its parts. Okay, so you divide it up. That's great for growing your vocabulary. But if you're on stage and you start thinking about your dynamics versus pitch control, you're lost, you're gone. You cannot do it. Okay, so it's very important that in the act of producing it, in the act of doing it, either the conception or the abortus, as far as I'm concerned, you really have to be very aware of the wholesomeness of this activity, much more so than the details. Okay? So when you produce music, in my opinion, which is heavily conceptual, and you produce it on a graphical paper and it's full of instructions like Stockhausen did back in the day, right? What you're doing is you're designing all the detail without having the big picture, right? You're actually saying, if the recipe is good, the meal will be good. Okay? Now I'm aware that maybe most of you even, or at least some of you, are fully convinced that if you have a good recipe, you're going to make a good meal. Anyone? Yeah? Okay, cool. Next question. If you make this meal for the 5th time, according to the same recipe, is it as good for you? Do you maybe get bored of cooking? Maybe even better? Okay.
It depends on the quality of the ingredients.
Quality of ingredients?
It depends on whether you get it right for the first time, because just because the recipe is good doesn't mean you're going to follow it through well. So
Yeah,
the 5th time you may follow it through well and then it's going to be a good meal, but after you've followed through it once, after that it gets boring.
Yeah, so that there is the boring factor.
So there is like a learning curve.
Leaking through. Okay, so but when you, for example, if you follow a recipe, would you try what you're cooking halfway, a few times throughout?
Yeah, probably.
Probably, yeah. Is there anyone who says, no, I don't need to try it, I just follow the recipe? Cool. Well, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. You obviously get my preference for improvising, really, with cooking, rather than following recipes. But what I'm just saying is that, this distinction between systemic thinking and wholesome thinking is actually something that neurologists are really working out now quite well. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a huge amount of really mind-blowing experiments. Let me just think. So so there are ways to accentuate the performance of your right brain hemisphere or left brain hemisphere. Okay, so if you and you actually do it by asymmetrical stimuli. Okay, so if your left eye sees something, it goes to the right hemisphere. If your right eye sees something, it goes to the left hemisphere. Evidently, these things mix up, but the way of processing this information is radically different. Okay, so what you can get done is you essentially have the reductive abilities. By the way, they kind of spread across the two hemispheres, so I kind of prefer to call it the reductive faculty. Your faculty, your ability to divide things up, cut them up, analyze them. And you have let's call it the perspective faculty, when you actually perceive the wholesomeness of things. Okay? So what you can get done, typically we would consider in our society that your reductive faculty should be the boss, right? And the funny thing is that the reductive faculty is extremely unreliable and extremely righteous. It always thinks it's right. So there's many experiments that show how you will be convinced by an explanation that you've made up and which is not true. Okay, I think one of them, I actually can't remember anything right now. There are things with moving, with picking objects. In fact, most of these experiments work better if you have a split brain, which is a surgical procedure, if you have epilepsy. But anyway, let's not go too deep into this. The point is that the point source is the biggest paradigm. As I mentioned previously, if you imagine the acoustical space to be a 3D ocean surface, then you can kind of visualize the amount of detail in every little compartment. The interesting thing, which is part of psychoacoustics, is that we have an amazing ability to compensate for the room effects. Okay, so one of the great experiments is one you can do yourself, is you take a recorder, walk from one reverberant room to another less reverberant room, keep talking as you walk through, record this sound. Then you try to conceive actually you should know it, you should first do this and then read the punchline. The punchline is to just listen to it. And if you're wide awake, you will probably realize that in the recording, you hear the quality of your voice change dramatically. Whereas while you were actually walking from one room to the other, you didn't hear the dramatic change in the space and, by the way, the timbre of your voice as well. Okay, so that's the point. As we move through space, neurologically we compensate for the effects. Okay, it's a kind of a thing, because it happens so frequently, the brain is so adaptive, right? It's an adaptive process, by the way, it's not a replacing process. I'm surprised how many neurologists even still talk about replacing and kind of patching up, put in the missing piece. Whereas there are no puzzles and there are no pieces, they're triggering thresholds. So you can have a stimuli which already triggers something that is not quite there, right? But in any case, this adaptation is crucial. So it's one of the ways you can realize this. Another interesting experiment is if you have two different pairs of speakers, you listen to them in this room and record them from the listening position. You take both pairs to another room, record them from the listening position. Probably you will conclude that you still recognize which speakers are which. If you listen to it on the recording, you probably won't get it, because the room colors the speakers tremendously, and you don't have the context to compensate for that. So when you're listening to recording of this, you will probably confuse the speakers. Okay? So there's a huge amount of adaptiveness going on in our audition. Cool. So point source, ocean surface, very complex. We cannot quite grasp it with a single microphone. That's cool. But I kind of mentioned this in Psychoacoustics, and I will go into more details here. Let's look at the literature. I'll probably be inspired. I will aim not to have a second half. It's still sunny out there. Have a lunch and go for a stroll in the forest or something. If someone has a car, we can collectively go, yes. Okay, so I will send you, so what I will do is I will maintain a folder on OneDrive. I will send you the link, and it's going to stay the same link throughout. So as I update the new slides, you will see them there. I think I will upload all the lectures to YouTube, so I will collect the links there as well. And I will put these books there as well. Building Acoustics, Asselino. So the thing is that there's quite a few large chapters here to cover. In fact, the last two lectures will be by a colleague who works as an architectural consultant for acoustics. Okay, so what you have is that, when people are building big, projects, halls, whatever, even for a block of flats, you necessarily have to follow some regulations. So there will be bits of this, which we call architectural acoustics. Typically, that's the experiment you won't be able to perform. We have things like floor knockers, although I can imagine some of you will happily build one in the meanwhile, which is a machine, although it's probably not going to be calibrated. But what we have is a machine which is about 20 kilos worth of metal, and you turn it on, it goes. And what you do is you put it upstairs, you know, on the top floor, and you measure the noise disturbance here. Oh, sorry. Suddenly alarmed. So we won't have the floor knocker to do that experiment. I mean, architectural acoustics, it's quite interesting. One of the really stunning things, I still don't have the experiment designed for that, but probably one of them will be along the lines of just, you know, trying to essentially be totally surprised by the amount of what we call flanking transmission. Okay, flanking transmission is transmission through solid matter. I don't know. There's your search engine.
Yeah, that's true.
So flanking is a huge thing because the sound is transmitted through solid matter faster than through air. Might you know? Okay, and if you have the structure of the building excited by one or the other noise source, then the noise travels easily and transmits quite easily. Okay, so if you have a tram track outdoors, anyone lives next to tramways or trains?
Yes, the train,
Well,
next to
all
the
of us
train
really.
station.
So both.
Like he's here.
So what gives you more noise, a tram or a train, if you're indoors?
Fogaskerekülés.
Fogaskerek.
Yeah,
Right.
I live next to the
Yeah. How do you call the fogaskerek in English? They have a name.
cogwheel.
Cogwheel railways, yes. If you have cogwheels, yeah, it's the noisiest, I agree. But actually, maybe even not. Obviously, it depends on the distance. But why is there a crucial difference? People who live next to the tramway, like my brother on József Körút, he knows how horrible it is. Because actually, you're kind of connected with solid matter to the tracks. Because you have the street, you have the street, you have the building. You have a mechanical direct connection. Typically, if it's a train, it kind of rests on soil, right? So the soil won't transmit that much noise. Okay? Now, what you will have, if you see maybe in Germany, in Japan probably, is that they actually they try to isolate, so there is a kind of a rubber material that supports the tram tracks. Okay, rather than so putting things on rubber will reduce flanking, and we will at some point look at sketches for amazing studios, and you will see that the point is that the solids don't touch. Everywhere you can, you put thick rubber and do things in this way. What's the difference between room treatment and isolation? In Hungarian, ugye a hangszigetelés, és mi a másik? A hang... Hát izoláció, igen. De pont ez a vicc, hogy magyarul, in Hungarian they kind of use the same word, which is also very confusing. So there's a crucial difference, because if you are isolating from sound, it means that you are trying to take care of your neighbor. If you're acoustically treating the room, you're trying to take care of yourself. And the two are largely different things. In fact, they're kind of, as we call it, what's the term? The term is, yeah, there is a good term, I'm sorry. It's called, I'll come to it. In any way, they're kind of opposite. They make the other more difficult. Okay, so if I wanted the most amazing acoustic for myself, so I want acoustic treatment, I want the most amazing room, then actually I really want a timber house made of wood, because the bass escapes, right? And because as soon as you're within concrete blocks or bricks or whatever, stone house, the bass reflects. And it's the biggest source of acoustical issues indoors. Okay, so if I take care of myself, I go to the forest and build a wooden house and put a studio in there. right? But if I have to do it in a building, right, where other people have a noise problem, then I have to deal with insulation, right? Then I have to make sure that the bass does not escape, but I'm also trying to make sure that it doesn't reflect back into the room. So what do I do with it?
Build a house in a house.
Yes, I can do, but what is it that I'm doing? So if we look at the transmission, so I have an energy source indoors, and I have boundaries, okay? So I don't want the energy to escape beyond the boundaries. I don't want the energy to reflect back into the room. So what's the only option left?
You're gonna put up some diffusers and stuff.
No. What's the thing along the lines of the question? Not. So if it doesn't go out, it doesn't come back in. What happens to the energy? Huh? It's trapped. Yeah. So it gets absorbed. And what I mean, it's trapped. What does it mean? It kind of stays there forever and keeps growing. Has to, smoke weed to keep calm. Or what? Kill it. We can send in. Yeah, exactly. Smoke while you can, and when you can't smoke no more, we have to kill you. I agree. That's a good way of treating acoustic energy. So what happens to the acoustic energy? What does it mean to decay? It doesn't disappear, right? So it doesn't go outside, it doesn't go back indoors. It's a simple question. By the way, this is my main tool, is to pose a question which you don't know the answer to and get you trying to think about it. It's the only type of question you will remember the answer to. All the answers that I give you without spending 5 minutes with the question, in 3 years you will forget it like last night already. You really need to build up the question. It's a bit like, getting a romantic relationship going, You kind of have to. Yeah, you have to enjoy building it, because otherwise it doesn't last that long. Okay, so I really built this question by now, you noticed, I actually built the question, then I built the meta question as well. So what is it? What happens to the energy? What does it become? It has to transform into?
Materials.
Doesn't become material, no? We're not there yet.
It does have to become something else.
Heat.
Yeah.
Heat. That's what happens. Okay, so then you're transforming energy to heat. What does this? Well, we have different types of absorbers. We have porous materials, which is the most popular thing, like mineral wool and stuff like this, like foam. Anyone knows what are the other two? We have other ways of absorbing acoustic energy.
What were the first?
which is not porous materials, which are typically thick, take up a lot of space.
Well,
they're not very popular, but in an office, not here, you will find them on ceilings. Yeah, how does this work? What's this? How does it? Acoustic panels, yeah? Called panel absorbers. Yeah. So typically what you have is a panel which has the size to resonate with the audible frequencies. And if the energy doesn't escape, if it doesn't reflect too much, then it kind of absorbs it. Okay, so we have panels. We can, by the way, build panels. I have asked for budget in Bristol to just get some timber and build these and excite them with speakers and find the resonant frequency and measure them. I think it's exciting, but they didn't quite give me the cash for that. They bought me new speakers though. That's nice. But if you guys, are interested, we can do this. So in November, I will be here for 2-3 days, so we can do, measurement and stuff and discuss things and maybe translate stuff to Hungarian if that's needed as well. Okay, panel absorbers, porous absorbers, and the third one is,
Membranes.
well, that's a kind of a panel absorber, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the third one, that's your hint. Yes, holes. All the holes in the house is resonators, Helmholtz resonator. Okay, so resonators obviously are kind of tricky because you would think, well, if I have a resonator in the room, I will just hear it more and it will ruin the neutral characteristic, right? But the point is to have a resonator that does not reflect energy back. Okay, so if you have a hole, a compartment, we typically can name it a Helmholtz resonator if the neck is neglectable. If you have a neck, by the way, if you have a wine bottle, you get a different equation. But if you have just the, oh no, sorry, I'm saying it wrong. The Helmholtz is with the neck, but we have an equation without the neck as well, which is slightly simpler. But in any case, if you have a volume of air, it acts as a spring, they say. It has springiness to it, right? It has acoustic impedance, which is a complex term I hope you will fall in love with. So I'm preparing you already for the romantic engagement with that. So what you have is that if you just have a hole, a compartment, a separate volume of air, it will resonate at a certain frequency. But if it's not dampened, the energy might escape and you might hear it. Okay? So if I have a bottle of beer which is already empty in the wind, the autumn is here, then you might hear it whistling, right? But if it was dampened, well, that's a kind of a stretch. But in essence, if you dampen your what's the good word here? I have to get back on track. Is a cave, a small cave. If you dampen it, then the energy doesn't escape and it absorbs at a given frequency. So out of the three, that's the most frequency-specific one. Anyway, so I don't know why I went into this because there will be more detail in the lecture, I think, on control room acoustics. Okay, so I'm just going to run through the literature, maybe take another 20 minutes of your time, and then we go for a lunch. So acoustics, building acoustics, you can imagine what it is. By the way, if in Britain already, even with all the music tech departments we have across the country, there still seems to be a lack of acousticians. So if you want to be a part of a large corporation that makes a huge amount of cash, you might as well think about acoustical consultancy. Okay? I mean, the sad thing is I have worked together with some for many years now. And the sad thing is that they're actually throwing the science out the window very readily. So because they're selling things. It's more like marketing with a good, with a good aura, with a slightly scientific aura. But they don't rely on models horribly, and they typically prefer the pragmatic solution than the scientific one. But nevertheless, it's quite important. And, they kind of have to sign things off and stuff like this. And they take a lot of, how should I put this, safety buffer, right? So if the regulation says in a building block at night where I'm supposed to sleep, there should be not more than 65 decibels of external noise, then they make sure that all the calculations say that it's 60 dB of external noise, and then they're safe. That's the kind of thing they do. But nevertheless, you can learn quite a lot, and it's essentially tools. And then, one part of the acoustics, which is probably the most elitist of them all, is your concert hall acoustics. Okay, so concert hall rooms, I mean, it's evidently decreasing in, interest for people. You can imagine when the only musical excitement you could get was once a month in a concert hall, that it was the most magical thing around, potentially, if you have, a sensitive ear for that. But this is not the case by far anymore. But in any case, it's a huge set of measurements, findings, design proposals in terms of concert hall acoustics, which I will do a lecture on. So this book, maybe I should already start shoving things into a separate folder. Acoustics books. Boca. Buka. It's actually like a Serbian word at that stage, no? Knjiga, buka. Okay, and I didn't want to move it, just copy it. Okay, building acoustics. Not necessarily something you will fall in love with, but in any case. Michael Barron. This is one of the thicker books on actual concert hall. Typically, although auditoriums is probably a more generic term that covers it, if I remember right. Oh my god, this is something else. If I remember right, I have to get this one. It's a fairly thick book, 460 pages and counting. Very detailed, a lot of interesting sketches. I mean, for those of you who are into classical music, you might actually enjoy reading this quite a bit.
This is all about concert hall.
Typically, yes. I mean, there is a bit about, rehearsal rooms, but typically, I mean, the two main things is appreciating music and appreciating speech, spoken signals, words. And there are different considerations. A trade-off, that's the word I didn't remember a second ago, a trade-off. Yeah. So typically there is a trade-off also if you want your hall to be suitable for speech or music. But actually there's quite a lot of interesting things there, so that's a biggie. Okay, let's see what else I have. Mathematics and music, acoustics, Beranek. So this is a historical text. On acoustics, many more equations. I think none of you will actually, a lot on electroacoustics. You might be aware that every basic acoustical model can be translated to a basic electrical circuit. Okay, so in the way that the neck and cavity, that's the other word I didn't remember. The neck and the cavity, the little cave. I said cave, I didn't remember cavity, funny. So a neck and a cavity are actually a condenser and inductor. Tekercs és kondenzátor. Okay? And that's why it has a resonance frequency just like an LCR circuit. So I won't go into this. In fact, it's something I've studied many years ago. I probably don't even remember the most of it. But here it is. There you go. Some comparison table between electrical elements and acoustical terms. So yeah, I mean, if anyone, I guess no one here is really into math. I might as well skip this one. You want to have it? Nah. No one's into math. Numerical sound synthesis, not that. Sound directions, audio preservation, nope. Acoustic, this one is important, okay? Cox, absorbers and diffusers, okay? Much more practical, a whole lot of ideas. In fact, I think one of the slightly underdeveloped topics is creating acoustical treatment from recycled material. So, and it's typically something you don't prepare for, because before someone gives you a truckload of something for free, you don't know what you have. But that's, I think, something that is, if someone kind of feels excited by acoustics, wants to have a career in the future, I think that's the kind of thing that you might get sponsored for as well, if we remain in European Union. Okay, so this one, essentially I will cover this in one lecture, and there's much more to cover. So absorbers and diffusers, very interesting. This is something else, Master Handbook of Acoustics. So another kind of standard academic text here. I'm afraid might have a tad too many equations for our taste here. Although there's some stuff which is explained in an accessible way. Okay, so how does a sine wave get created by a weight on a spring? Okay, and then you see it draws a sine wave, things like this. Could you think of another example in real life that you've seen on your way to university today? Something that draws an exact sine wave? You probably didn't see a weight on a spring, but you saw something that is actually producing a perfect sine wave.
Wheels.
Wheels, yes. How can you make a wheel create a sine wave? What are the two things to do?
Rotate and
Yeah, you have to pick the angle of viewing, so to speak. So you have to look at it straight ahead, right, such that it goes up and down, not in an elliptical fashion. And the second thing?
It has to move. Like
It has to move, and what's the characteristic of this movement? Yes, that's the wheel already, yeah? Unless it's on the road in Hungary, obviously.
It has to also.
What's the crucial thing about this movement?
the paper has to move.
Well, we didn't quite get to drawing it on paper. We just kind of visualize it by looking at it straight ahead. But what has to be? Constant speed. Yeah, has to be constant speed. Okay, cool. So there's quite I think I'll put this one in. I think it does get more complex.
When you do like this red glasses thingy, is this also gonna be a sine wave?
Yes, resonant objects like glass, they have a specific frequency, fundamental frequency. However, there will be harmonics. So it's not a pure sine wave. The thing is that in acoustical domain, I should say in the mechanical realm, and in the electronics realm, we cannot create a good sine wave, believe it or not. Right? We can create it digitally. To make an analog sine wave oscillator is hugely painful, and it's never good. Okay? Because it has to be a perfect motion. I think I won't go into sine waves that much in this class. So I may as well say a few things. The things that we have is friction. Okay? But the friction is not a huge problem. The friction causes decay in time. Okay? Unless you have a constant energy input. But the thing that causes harmonics, any ideas what causes harmonics?
Anything?
Huh?
Anything?
Non-linearities. Okay? So what you have, for example, if you remember the spring, if you have a perfect spring, which means that the stretch is exactly proportional to the force, okay, then you will get a perfect sine wave. If you have a nonlinear string, which means that the amount of force depends on the stretch in a nonlinear fashion, such that if I stretch it too much, it doesn't have as much force, right? So it's nonlinear. The force doesn't linearly follow essentially the distance, the spatial distance. Then what you get is you get an imperfect sine wave. You know, the corners are just not like that. It's either flatter or more sharp. By the way, it's a good exercise to think about which way makes it sharp and which way makes it flatter. So you have a lame string, spring, a loose one, which is typically the actual spring in real life. If you stretch it too much, it's going to fail to pull back with sufficient force, right? Will that produce a sharper sine wave or a lumped sine wave? Flattened, yeah. Do we have a spring which works the other way around? It gives you more force if you stretch it more? Who knows? Maybe maybe there is a hydraulic thing that does this. I actually have no clue. Anyway, so this book has some accessible stuff. It has some psychoacoustics as well. It's tremendously long as well. Bloody hell. This is Everest goes up to... These are great things, you know, if you have a lot of time on your hands. Have to stay indoors and low heating. Just want to see a page number somewhere. Oh, I've probably... Because what I do with these books, I'm sorry if it causes an issue. It might do. Is that I crop them such that on my digital paper reader I don't have too much empty space and the letters are larger. So this one is actually cropped such that you don't see a page number. Great. That's my doing. But probably in the contents, fundamentals of sound, sounds levels, decibels, free field, perception, so that's psychoacoustics, signal speaks, blah, 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 string instruments, a bit of instrument acoustics, reflection, diffraction, that's hardcore acoustics, refraction as well, diffusion, comp filter effects, reverberation, unsurprisingly, only 20 praises on reverberation, absorption, adjusting, interfering noise, ventilating system, so gets a bit into the buildings, architectural acoustics, and then listening rooms, small recording studios, now we're talking control rooms, audio video rooms, and then large halls, about 500 pages. Okay, so fairly accessible part of the reading list. Okay, Farnell is the best book in the world anyway, not part of this. We won't do instrument acoustics, unfortunately. This is psychoacoustics, Holden, medium level, concert hall acoustics. I will accelerate at this stage, I'm getting hungry. Acoustics and psychoacoustics. This is very accessible. Okay, kind of university textbook, but I should actually say it's a high school one. Has these interesting examples. It actually allows you to study systemically some of the equations, some of the math, but has some really good explanations as well. In fact, I think in my slideshows, I borrow quite a bit from Mr. Howard. So you will see these things come back. Okay, sweet anticipation of a romantic relationship and music. Okay, okay, baby. I'll see you after the lecture. Measured tones, interplay of physics and musics. Okay, so there is a bit of acoustics here. There is a bit of instrument acoustics as well. So I'm going to put that in for those of you who play instruments or are interested in. It's a very much anecdote-based book. So if you're bored of equations, it can replace your, what's the popular literature now? Julia. Or I don't know, it doesn't exist anymore. I just found a stack if anyone wants the kind of soap opera, the written soap opera of the 70s in Hungary. Julia, megvan? I don't know what's popular now. Probably nothing on paper anyway. But it's more anecdotal and it's a kind of a bedtime reading which can be quite good as well. Signal processing, music transmission, no. Katraf, yes. 11, no. Too many equations. I think this is beyond. This is more a kind of a technical engineering book. I think we will skip this one. I mean, just a basic page. Equations, tables. Could be interesting, but most of this is covered. And it's also a kind of a historical reading. Marshall Long, Architectural Acoustics. This is the more detailed text on this. Maybe a bit more technical, but we have another book. I'm going to try to keep the books to minimum, just so you don't get lost. So I'm going to exclude this one. Museum ethics, nothing. Electronics. There's one more that I really want to pass you in a moment. This is Psychoacoustics. Mayer, Acoustics and the Performance of Music. Let's see the contents. What do we have here? Particle velocity, physics, structure of musical sound, okay, tonal characteristics, percussion instruments, directional characteristics. This is kind of music, instrument acoustics mostly, together with concert halls. Skip that. Okay. Recording studio design, this one. This is your favorite bedtime book, I think. A lot of decent anecdotes, a lot of real-time stories. The guy has designed some amazing studios around the globe, has been doing that for decades, then went into talking about this more than doing it. A lot of interesting stuff. And a kind of a practical point of view. So what you may find, it's maybe an interesting exercise to keep your meta-awareness, solid. You always have to think about what you're thinking about. That's your meta-awareness. Does that work for any of you? to be aware of what you're thinking about. So not to be lost in your thoughts.
Oh, well,
Right, it's an exciting thing to do.
Do not overthinking at the same time.
Huh?
It's possible to not overthink.
Yeah, it kind of keeps you from that, but it also gives you a good context. It gives you the awareness of what the hell you're doing. And what you will find is that if you have your meta-thinking capacity switched on while you go through some of these books, you might get a very clear picture. Is this a person who first fell in love with the sound or first fell in love with physics? Okay? Because typically the priority in the way they reason, in the way they do things is obvious. You know, the context is really evident. You know, either they're serving the numbers or they're serving their ears. Both end up in the brains, by the way. It's not far from each other. Okay, but that's an interesting thing to consider and to kind of be aware of what's going on. Okay, so Newell is definitely the practical guy, the guy who probably first fell in love with the sound. Acoustics and noise control. Well, the noise control is the kind of term that you get $1 million job with, you know, for huge companies in the West world. We have enough of that. I'm not going to force that. Musical signal processing, advanced stuff, different things. Principles of vibration and sound. Rossing and Fletcher. Well, these guys, they typically get into music instruments quite a bit. But this one contains actually some interesting technical things. Linear array of oscillators. Extremely exciting stuff happening there. You see, you can get chaos already from a pendulum attached to a pendulum. A double pendulum is already a chaotic system. So it's quite exciting. So this is kind of taking the more advanced technical stuff and trying to make it accessible. I'm probably not gonna pass you this one. Neuroscience, great. Refining sound to synthesis. No, Smith. I got the Newell, so I think I'm done, to be honest. Virtual acoustic music instruments. Complex stuff. Templars, amazing stuff. Complex stuff. Perception. Digital audio, basic stuff. Overview, and Zwicker, psychoacoustics. Okay? So we have these. Well, that's probably, what's this, 2, 4, 6, 8 books, about 400 on average. Just slightly over 2,000 pages, okay? So as I said in the beginning, if you're interested in acoustics, you will learn it. If you're not interested, you probably won't. I'm not the guy who's going to teach it to you. You're the person who can teach it to yourself. I'm going to try to excite you, get you, you know, active, proactive, drunk, and stoned. And then the rest is up to you. Okay? Maybe a bit of psychedelics as well. Just to top it up. But less frequently, please.
Tonight.
Well, I guess tomorrow better, yeah.
Okay.
Who's coming to Szeged tomorrow?
Tonight there will be a party.
But today there is a party, yeah? Yes. Yes. I might actually go. Are we starting from here when the school closes?
There will be a good concert. Let's go for the I don't know.
Okay.
He's doing like a live act. It's half an hour.
But what?
Ez most a téma van.
De az hol van? Itt a...
Itt a zene.
Ja, hánykor?
Fél órás live act, 9-től fél 9.
Tényleg? Aha.
Aztán utána én meg megyek oda, mert ilyen csinálom.
Na, akkor jövök én is.
De nem a Déva koncertre kell jönni, hanem utána.
Hát ezt a fél órát kibírom.
És aztán utána meg Pandemonium. Az lesz a buli.
Talizzunk 8-kor, akkor az a főterem, ott a 4-en?
Nem is kell fölmenni, szerintem még ki lesz majd.
Ja, ott, ahol fölállították a színpadot.
Szerintem ott lesz.
Holnap egyébként mikor lesznek az orvos?
Igen, holnap Psychoacoustics 11-től 2-ig.
Ez pszichoakusztika.
Igen, és végleges témaválasztás van holnap pszichoakusztikából, ahogy bejelentettem.
Ma is lesz
Akusztika ennyi, itt lesz reggel 11. És akkor 2-kor mi indulunk Krisszel. Ezt nem is kell felvenni már. Köszönöm a figyelmet, lehet menni ebédelni, és akkor ha van kérdés, gondolom nincs.
Ma lesz pszichoakusztika?
Nem lesz ma. Nem, ma végeztünk.
Ennyi